Are you like me and you've had the thought of, I just need a break? Maybe you've been pushing for weeks or your life has been unusually busy lately. Maybe you're even just coming out of a hard season, or maybe there isn't even one obvious thing you can point to anymore. You just know you're tired. So you finally take the break. You sleep in for a full 8 hours. You clear the weekend. You spend an afternoon on the couch. Maybe you even take the vacation and you think, okay, this is just what I needed. Except afterward, you're not really feeling much better. Maybe you're still exhausted or irritable and you just can't settle. Maybe you're even lying beside a pool in a beautiful place and you're already thinking 3 days ahead of you, worrying about what all of that day holds. And then something else starts to happen, right? You start judging yourself for it. Why can't I just relax and enjoy this? I'm resting. What else am I supposed to do? If you've ever felt that way, this episode is for you because I want to connect a dot today that I wish I had understood much earlier. Rest is not just the absence of activity. It's creating enough space and enough felt safety for your body to begin settling, recovering, and restoring. And those aren't always the same thing. Sometimes life gets quiet before your body does. Welcome back to Whole She Rises. If you're new here, I'm Mandi. What happens when you've spent years doing and then you finally stop? Shouldn't you feel better by now? I thought so, but that wasn't my experience. I remember being at the beach with my family during one season of my life not too long ago, and the beach has always been my happy place. I love sitting there with my family, watching my husband, the fun parent, play with my boys while I read. There was nowhere else I needed to be or wanted to be. I wasn't at work. There wasn't an emergency happening. My boys were okay. I was with a husband I loved, and yet I didn't feel peace. I felt on edge and disconnected, really unsteady. And I could not understand that because my life was finally good. My husband was a good man. My boys were good and healthy. I had a career I really loved and was incredibly proud of. I thought I felt secure, or at least I thought I should feel secure. So why couldn't I relax? Why couldn't I be fully present? Why couldn't I just sit there and enjoy this beautiful life that was finally right in front of me? At the time, I didn't have any language for this, but looking back now, knowing how much my body had carried before that day, it makes so much more sense now. Because although my circumstances had finally changed, some of what was happening inside of me, it hadn't caught up yet. I was still waiting. I was waiting for someone to let their end of the deal down. I was waiting for my husband to somehow prove me right in my fear that maybe I shouldn't trust anyone again. Waiting for something to happen that would make my boys feel unsettled or hurt again. Waiting for my manager and coworkers to figure out I wasn't really as capable as maybe they thought I was. And what that would maybe mean for my success. Would it disappear? And if I'm being really honest, I was waiting for me to let me down again. Was I making another wrong decision? Well, I was waiting to prove to myself that maybe I couldn't trust my own choices either. And there was one more layer underneath all of that, one that took me a lot longer to admit. I think part of me was afraid of what God might allow us to go through again. I loved God. I trusted Him. At least consciously, I would have told you I did. But I had also lived enough life to know that loving God doesn't mean hard things don't happen anymore. And somewhere along the way, I had quietly started trying to make sure that bad things wouldn't keep happening. So I watched, I anticipated, I planned, I tried to manage, I worked really hard, I tried to hold everything together, I tried to make sure everyone was okay. And I didn't even really know that I was doing it. I just thought that it was what a responsible mom did, what a good wife does, what a successful woman had to do. I thought it was just me. So there I was sitting beside the ocean, technically resting, but some part of me was still preparing for what might happen next. And no amount of beautiful scenery could make me put down something I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Maybe yours doesn't look anything like my story. Maybe you finally let your husband take over for a weekend, or maybe your kids went to their grandparents, or you finally finished the project that had been consuming you for months. Maybe you took the vacation you had been looking forward to all year and you get there, but you couldn't turn your brain off. You're lying on the beach thinking about the emails waiting for you. You're making sure everyone else has their sunscreen. You're trying to figure out dinner plans for the evening. You're wondering if the kids are they having enough fun? And you're thinking about what you maybe need to do when you get back home. You're checking your phone. You're mentally organizing the rest of this week and maybe even next week. And then you get irritated with yourself because you think, what is wrong with me? I'm literally on vacation right now. Or maybe yours happens at night. You're exhausted all day. You've been dreaming about getting into bed since about 2:00. And finally, everyone is settled. The kitchen is cleaned up. You brush your teeth. You turn the light off. Your head finally hits the pillow. And your brain completely wakes up. Did I send that email? Why did she say that? I need to remember to call that person tomorrow. Did I handle that conversation well today? What time does he need to leave in the morning? And suddenly you're having a meeting with yourself at 11:30 at night. Your body is lying in bed. Nothing is physically being asked of you, but some part of you is still responding to the day and maybe to tomorrow. And this is where the science gets pretty interesting, because researchers actually have language for some of this. And learning that helped me feel less alone, less crazy. There's a concept in stress research called perseverative cognition. It might sound a little complicated, but it describes something I think really familiar. It's what happens when the stressful thing is no longer happening, but we're still thinking about it, replaying it, worrying about it, or anticipating the next version of it. Research has found that worry, rumination, and anticipation can prolong the physiological activation associated with the stress beyond the stressful event itself. And when I first learned this, it really helped something click for me, because it means that the absence of a stressor isn't necessarily the same thing as recovery from the stressor. Read that again in your own life. The meeting ended, the deadline passed, the conflict is over, the kids are asleep, you're off work, you're on vacation, you're lying in bed. The thing that was stressing you has stopped, but maybe your mind and some of the systems in your body responding along with it haven't fully stopped responding yet. And I want to be really careful here. You've probably heard people online say things like your nervous system is stuck in fight or flight. I've even used that language. But I don't really love reducing the nervous system to just that. Your nervous system isn't a light switch. It's really dynamic. It's constantly adjusting to what is happening around you and inside of you. But after long periods of stress, uncertainty, or worry, over responsibility, or needing to stay alert for whatever reason, it can be harder to shift quickly into recovery, which means you can stop doing without immediately feeling restored. And I think that's the distinction so many of us are missing. This also helps us understand something I hear women say all the time. I'm sleeping enough, but why am I still so tired? And before I go any further, I want to make an important distinction here. Persistent fatigue can have a lot of causes, right? Sleep apnea, iron deficiency, thyroid problems, hormonal changes, medication effects, illnesses, sleep disorders, and so many other things. So if you're consistently exhausted despite adequate sleep, please don't hear this episode and decide, oh, it's just my nervous system. That's not what I'm saying. Persistent or unexplained fatigue deserves some appropriate medical evaluation. But what I am saying is that there's another piece we don't talk about enough: sleep physiology and stress physiology they do interact. Researchers studying insomnia have looked at something called sleep reactivity, essentially how vulnerable someone's sleep is to being disrupted by stress. And worry and rumination can interact with that sensitivity, which means the number of hours between the time you climb into bed and the time your alarm goes off doesn't tell us everything about how restorative that sleep actually was. Sleep opportunity and restoration, they aren't identical. And suddenly that woman saying, but I do sleep 8 hours, makes more sense. So maybe the question isn't only how long did you sleep, but it's also what state were you carrying into that sleep? And I think this is where we can zoom out a little bit, because what happens at bedtime is really just one example of something we do all the time, right? We can change the external conditions and expect our internal state to immediately follow. We close the laptop, we clear the calendar, we lie down or maybe even leave town. And sometimes those things are exactly what we need. But removing the demand doesn't necessarily mean we immediately stop carrying the demand. And I think vacation might be one of the clearest places to see this, because how many times have you thought, if I could just get away for a few days, I could finally feel better? Man, I've thought that so many times. And here's the interesting part. Getting away really can help. New research actually supports that. A 2025 meta-analysis looking at vacations and well-being found substantial benefits from taking vacations and suggested that those benefits may last a lot longer than some earlier research had indicated. So I'm not about to tell you not to take the vacations or that they don't work. Please take the vacation. But what I found even more interesting was that what seemed to make that time away particularly restorative. Two things really stood out. It was physical activity and something researchers called physiological detachment. Physiological detachment basically means mentally disengaging from the demands you're taking a break from. And when I learned that, I immediately thought, there it is. Because isn't that the same thing we've been talking about? You can change your location without changing what you're carrying, right? You can sit beside the ocean, but still be answering emails. You can be looking at a beautiful mountain range while still mentally running through your to-do list. You can lie beside that pool while still worrying whether everyone else is having a good time. Your body can be on vacation while your mind is still fully working. And this isn't just about paid work. Women are carrying all kinds of invisible work. Who needs what? Who is upset? What are we eating? What appointments still need to be scheduled? What needs to be packed? What are we forgetting? What else is someone feeling? What happens when we get home? And sometimes nobody is actively asking us to do all of that anymore. We've gotten so used to carrying all of that we carry it automatically. So yes, where you are matters, but what state you're experiencing while you're there, it matters so much too, maybe even more. Your location changed, your calendar changed, the demands may have even changed, but what you're carrying internally may take a little longer to change. And I think that's why this distinction matters so much. The goal isn't to say, well, vacations don't work or sleep doesn't work. Of course they do. The point is that creating the opportunity for rest and actually experiencing restoration are related but not identical. And once I understood that, I started realizing something else. Maybe we've been defining rest a little too narrowly. I used to think rest mostly meant doing nothing. And sometimes it does mean that. Sometimes what you genuinely need is a nap or an afternoon on the couch or an early bedtime or having absolutely nothing on the calendar. But I've learned that passive rest and restorative rest are not always the same thing. Research on recovery from work has looked at experiences like physiological detachment, relaxation, having some autonomy or control over your time, and even activities that create a sense of mastery. And remember, physical activity was associated with greater well-being during vacations too. So maybe restorative rest for you today, maybe it's not lying on the couch. Maybe it's walking outside without your phone. Maybe it's playing tennis. Maybe it's sitting on your porch with your Bible and a cup of coffee. Maybe it's cooking because you want to cook, not because 4 people are standing in the kitchen asking what's for dinner. Maybe it's just laughing with somebody you love or creating something. Maybe it's praying or taking a nap. And maybe it really is doing absolutely nothing. The question isn't, does this look like rest? The better question might be, does this experience reduce demand and help me recover? Or am I just simply being inactive? Because those aren't always the same thing. I use the word safety a lot around here, so I want to be really clear about what I mean. I'm not saying your body has some little meter that flips between safe and unsafe. And I'm definitely not saying you need to convince yourself that nothing difficult will ever happen again. I know better than that. We all know better than that. Life doesn't promise any of us that nothing bad will happen again. So when I talk about safety in this context, I'm talking about the ability to reduce vigilance, to recognize nothing is being actually asked of me right now. I don't have to solve this right now. I don't have to prepare for everything right now. I don't have to anticipate or prove anything right now. I don't have to hold everyone else together right now. And for a woman who has spent years being the one who handles all these things, that can feel pretty unfamiliar. Sometimes stopping doesn't immediately feel good. Sometimes quiet feels really uncomfortable because doing is more familiar. Managing is familiar. Being needed is really familiar. Overthinking and anticipating, that feels familiar. And when all that finally gets quiet, sometimes we're finally able to hear everything that was underneath it all. I wish someone had told me this years ago. You don't need to try harder at resting, because I probably would have done exactly that. I would have turned rest into another project. I would have found the perfect morning routine, bought the right supplements, tracked my sleep, created a recovery checklist, and then wonder why I was stressed about whether I was resting correctly. Because that's what over-efforting does. It turns even healing into something to achieve. What I actually needed was to become curious about what allowed my body to experience restoration. I needed to notice what helped me soften, what helped me to become present, what helped me stop anticipating all the time, and maybe even more importantly, I needed to understand why I had become so good at anticipating in the first place. Because for me, a lot of my vigilance had become disguised as responsibility. I thought anticipating every possible problem, that's what made me a good mom. I thought holding everything together made me a really good wife. I thought proving myself over and over, that's what was making me successful. I thought being prepared would protect me. And somewhere underneath all that, I had begun trusting my own vigilance more than I trusted God. That's hard for me to admit because I love God. I believe in Him. I prayed. I read my Bible. I went to church. But life had shown me that painful things could still happen. And some part of me had quietly decided, maybe if I pay enough attention, if I make all the right decisions, maybe if I work hard enough, and if I anticipate everything ahead enough, I can keep us from hurting like that again. But I couldn't. And realizing this wasn't frightening in the way I thought it would be. Eventually, it became freeing, because if I was never capable of controlling all of those outcomes anyway, maybe I could finally stop carrying all the responsibility for them. Maybe you came into this episode believing I'm exhausted because I'm not resting enough. And sometimes that might absolutely be true, but maybe that's not the whole story. Maybe you've also believed I'm bad at resting, or something is wrong with me because I can't relax, or I need to get better at this. Maybe you came into this episode believing I'm exhausted because I'm not resting enough. And sometimes that might absolutely be the truth, but maybe that's not the whole story. Maybe you're also believing I'm bad at resting, or something is wrong with me because I can't relax, or I just need to get better at this. But what if we replaced all of that with, I don't need to try harder at rest. I need to understand what allows my unique body to experience restoration. That's different, right? That's curiosity instead of judgment, listening instead of forcing, and receiving instead of trying to achieve. So, what I'm not going to do is give you 5 ways to regulate your nervous system today. I'm not going to give you another checklist. I just want you to try one thing. The next time you notice yourself saying, I need to rest, I want you to pause before automatically doing whatever you've decided rest looks like. Now, I want you to ask yourself, what would actually help me feel less demanded of right now? Maybe you've been sitting at a computer all day and your body wants a little movement. Go walk around the block. Maybe you've been surrounded by people all day and you need 10 minutes where nobody is talking to you. Maybe you've been working alone and what would restore you is a little bit of connection. Maybe your mind is swirling and you need to just write down everything you're afraid you'll forget. Maybe you need to pray. Maybe you need to put your phone in another room. Maybe you genuinely do need sleep. You don't have to get it right. You're just simply learning to notice. And then later, ask yourself, do I feel any more restored after that? Not, did I perform rest correctly or what's wrong with me? Just, what did I notice? Because that's how we begin reconnecting with ourselves and our bodies. And maybe this is the bigger invitation. What if rest stopped being another thing you had to accomplish? What if you didn't judge yourself because the vacation didn't fix everything? What if you stopped assuming that your inability to immediately relax meant something was wrong with you? What if you began understanding your exhaustion as just information? Maybe healing sometimes looks like learning. I feel restored when I walk outside. I need quiet today. I need connection. I need to let somebody else handle this. I didn't realize how much my phone keeps me mentally engaged. I didn't realize how much responsibility I'm carrying that nobody actually asked me to carry. And maybe eventually you begin discovering something even deeper. I don't have to hold everything together in order to be okay. For me, that realization has become about so much more than nervous system regulation. It's become pretty spiritual. I don't have to know what's coming next all the time. I don't have to prevent every hard thing. I don't have to hold every person I love together. God never asked me to do that. And there is a kind of rest that becomes possible when I remember that. Not because I believe nothing difficult will ever happen to me or people I love, but because I'm learning that I don't have to live today preparing for all the what ifs that might never actually happen. So if you've been resting, but you're still exhausted, I hope you leave today asking a different question. Not just, how can I rest more? But what actually leaves me feeling restored? And maybe, what helps your body recognize that nothing is being asked of me right now? Because rest isn't just the absence of activity. It's creating enough space and enough felt safety for the body to begin settling, recovering, and restoring. You don't have to try harder at it. You get to learn yourself. You get to notice. You get to practice putting things down. You get to let other people carry what belongs to them. You get to come back to the moment you're actually living in instead of constantly preparing for the one that might come next. And little by little, maybe you discover that rest isn't something else you have to achieve. Maybe it's something you learn how to receive. If something connected for you today, I'd love to hear about it. Come find me on Instagram at Whole She Rises and tell me, what is something that actually leaves you feeling restored? Not what you think should restore you, but what actually does. And if you know another woman who keeps saying, I'm resting and I don't understand why I'm still so tired, will you send this episode to her? Sometimes one connected dot can completely change the way we understand what our body has been trying to tell us for a long time. And if you haven't listened to last week's episode, The Hidden Cost of Over-Efforting, I would actually go there next, because if today's conversation has you wondering, why is it so hard for me to stop anticipating, managing, doing, and carrying? That episode helps us understand how those patterns can develop in the first place. And if you're new here, make sure you're subscribed or following the show so we can keep connecting these dots together. Until next time, keep rising and becoming the whole woman God created you to be. I'll see you here next week.